All right, okay, thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight here at Point Blank Music School. For the people here that are watching at home, sitting in the audience that don't know who you are, can you just give us a brief introduction?
Yes, I'm Sander van Doorn. I'm a Dutch DJ as well as producer. Started out about 25 years ago as a bedroom DJ, and now I'm sitting over here.
Today, what we're going to be talking about is your career in general, stuff about what started you as a DJ producer, what inspired you, so we can help inspire people watching at home and all the students out here at Point Blank. And also about Purple Haze, which is your, not actually a new alias. Some people don't know about this.
No, I think it's about 12 years old. 12 years ago, I released my first track, Adrenaline.
And that was under as Purple Haze?
Yeah, as Purple Haze, yeah. It was around a time where I really wanted to explore myself as a producer. I was already doing different aliases like Sam Sharp, obviously Sander van Doorn, but also like Sandler, which was like really, euphoric kind of high BPM trance. And Purple Haze for me was just another alias for me to explore more darker sounds. But that was already about 12 years ago.
And today, as Purple Haze, I have noticed it's quite dark and a bit more techie as well.
Yeah, it's still as dark as it was 12 years ago, but it changed a lot as well over the last couple of years, where I kind of experiment a little bit about what I thought Purple Haze was all about, which could be sometimes more techno based, other times it was more up tempo, a little bit more trancey based, but just in general with a dark and moody sound.
I do remember, when we're going back at least a decade ago now. But one of my favorite tracks that you remixed was Control Freak. Oh, yeah. And stuff like that, I feel like, is definitely harder and probably more techier. And your sound has evolved as time has gone along. So what I want to actually talk about is, do you think it's as important today to be stuck to one genre? Like, do you think as a DJ, you have to produce one type of music, DJ one type of music, and be labeled as a trance DJ, as an EDM DJ? Because I did notice when I went to Fabric, your recent gig this weekend, and you played stuff by like Tale of Us, for example. Yeah. So it wasn't completely just trance or something just like in one kind of pigeonhole.
Yeah, that's when I started producing about 25 years ago as a bedroom DJ. I pretty much I loved all genres that were out there. It could be like really hard sounds like hardcore back in the day, like Thunderdome, but also like techno or house. When I went to the dance saloon for the first time, when I was around 18 years old, Marco V was a resident back then in the club, and he was mixing house with techno and more trancey melodies. And I kind of loved mixing it all up. And I think, translated to, the sounds today, I think for a starting producer, it's very important to absorb all these different sounds, really, find your own way in between. You can combine like a deep house melody with a more techie edge, or just the other way around. And, that's the most important thing for you to create your own identity.
Let's go back when you were starting to produce and talk about what was your motivation, your inspiration at the time. Like, what were you listening to when you started to produce music? What made you create your sound?
I was literally listening to everything that was, dance related. Already when I was really young, I already started listening to music from Depeche Mode and Toto and Aha. Just because my older brother, he bought all those vinyls, and whatever he loved, I wanted to listen to myself. So I guess that's where I already kind of got acquainted a little bit more disco sounding tracks. And when I became 16 years old, obviously I was young, so I wanted to listen a little bit more, to the harder styles. And when I was 18, it completely shifted towards, I love house music. And then I was like, I actually also love trance music with more techie edges. So I pretty much absorbed it all.
Did you have a history of music theory? Did you play an instrument before you started going to the studio?
Not really. No, I got a groove box from my brother when I was around 17 years old. Kind of like a drum computer with adding programming sounds as well. So that's kind of how I started making melodies. First copied existing melodies like Fateless, Insomnia, and kind of learned myself to create my own melodies just with using existing melodies.
I guess that's a great way for anyone here to learn, is basically try and recreate something that's popular, and then you can figure out what makes it tick and what makes it so good.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of, it feels like remixing an existing track, or start with editing a track. Make it your own mix. That's the easiest way to get the whole flow of producing, and then the step behind that is creating your own melodies.
On that kind of level about creating your own melody, creating your sound and all that kind of stuff, another thing that everyone here probably is struggling or in the process of doing is creating their own brand.
Yeah.
So for you, I guess what I want to know is, you had Sander Van Doorn as a brand, and then you had to go to Purple Haze, and you essentially resurrected something from years back, and then you had to bring it back. So it would have been like creating a new brand again. What were some of the challenges that you would have faced when you did that?
Well, obviously the first challenge is making people aware Purple Haze exists. So for us, it was all about investing a lot of money into making special video clips, creating content. And for me personally, as an artist, it was all about being in the studio, producing one track after the other. I'm already, when I kind of relaunched Purple Haze, I already had an album. So I had a lot of content I could use for the whole branding. But, it's getting people aware that Purple Haze existed, but also that I was behind Purple Haze as well. So, it was a big process, but, it turned out all right with doing special gigs at special places. The first shows I did was in Australia. And then straight after, we did Ultra Music Festival. So we already had the big platforms to promote ourselves.
What about for somebody like the people here that essentially probably don't have a big PR budget, for example? Yeah. What's something more homegrown that somebody can do, like Instagram or just creating music or something?
Yeah, it's connecting to the people that you love, musically, sending them tracks, making sure that you have a lot of tracks to be released. But most of all, it's about being critical with yourself. And before I released my very first track, I already made, I think, 40 or 50 tracks that I felt weren't really, up for being released. So I was very critical, and it wasn't actually my own decision to send my tracks to a record label. Somebody really pushed me to send stuff, and that's I think it's the basis, is be very critical with yourself. There's a lot of artists out there, a lot of great artists out there, and they're all doing the same thing, and you want to make sure that just a little bit better.
On that as well, about other artists, collabs are something that you've done quite a bit of as well. Yeah. So, for example, one of the biggest tunes is Gold Skies, for example. Yeah. What was it like making a collab like that, something that was so big? And what was it like working with essentially some of the most high-profile artists and just all of you guys just coming together to create a monster of a tune like that?
Yeah, it kind of started with the Tsunami track. The guys from Dubs sent me a few months before that. They sent me the track, which sounded great as an idea, but their mixing was horrible. So I told them, send me the parts, and we do some remastering ourselves. And it completely blew up. And so the next track they had in mind, they sent me a vocal. It was a female vocal, and the male vocal is their vocal themselves. Oh. Yeah. So I started producing a whole track around it, and then I had it shown to the record company, and Martin Garrix, he picked it up on it as well. And so he contacted me and was like, oh man, I could really do something with this as well. So he kind of finished the track.
What was it like working with Martin at the time? Because at the time, he was still coming up. He wasn't #1 DJ that we all know today.
No, he was You know, the thing I love about Martin is he's still himself these days as he was back then. You know, very energetic, very, you know, really thinking about ways to you know, improve his own sound. For instance, Animals. You know, usually when you produce a track, you have like V1 until V10. I think he was at V25 when he finished the track. So he just kept on going and going and going. And, you know, that's something that's pretty special, you know, with somebody his age.
So with stuff like your label Doorn, for example, it's arguably one of the biggest EDM labels of the last decade, because we've just finished this decade. What was it like running a label that big and that prominent in essentially one of the biggest genres of dance music in the world?
Yeah, you know, starting the label was, for me personally, a way to extend my identity as an artist. The first track I released was Riff. And you know, for me, it was great because I had this whole platform around me releasing my own stuff. And I wasn't really thinking about releasing other people's stuff. But people got aware I had my own record label, so they started sending me stuff. And I really loved that stuff. And it was really into my sound bracket as well. So also, yeah, why not release other people's tracks as well? So that's how I got acquainted with the whole side of A&Ring. It's really listening to a track, give people advice on how to finish it. And yeah, it started growing and growing. And then around the EDM era, say 2011, 2012, it kind of, you know, exploded. So it's so much tracks got sent every single day, and it became a big part of my career as well.
How many tracks do you think at the peak did you get sent weekly, let's say?
Well, I would say that the peak of the label was around 2013, but amount of tracks sent per day has never changed really. It's about 100 to 150 per day, so that's a lot of tracks.
How do you manage to go through all of that kind of stuff? How many people do you have on your team that work on Doorn?
On Doorn Masterclass right now, there's 2 people working. One of which filters out all the, you know, the good tracks from a lot of tracks being sent over. So
the ones that should have been that first 40 that they didn't release.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those tracks. And so once every week, there's still a lot of tracks that's you know, remain. So I kind of go through all the tracks, and I pretty much give advice. Sometimes the track is already finished, and you know, always looking for something new, you know, something original.
Is there any particular style of music that you look for?
Well, funnily enough, it's I don't know why. It's the last 10 producers I've signed. They're all Italian. Yeah, so they have this.
Any Italians in the room?
There you go. Ciao. I don't know. They have a really passionate, moody sounding house/techno sound. I'm really into it right now.
It's actually quite interesting you say that, because when I was at ADE, we did another video with Ferry Corsten and Flashover and his label boss over there, and it was a live A&R, and people brought things, and they ended up signing one track, and it was exactly, as you're saying, very housey but melodic kind of techno sound.
Yeah, like jacking beats, really good drive, you know, with the bass line, and with a nice moody melody on top.
So as someone like you, who's, I would say, is a tastemaker with such a big label, you have the privilege of dictating how the scene of dance music goes. Because if you play a big track, people will see it on 1001 track list, for example, and they'll want to play it. Let us in a little secret. What do you think is the next big sound?
The next big sound, you know, I would say in general, it will go a little bit more towards people really knowing their sound as a fan. For instance, right now in Asia, well, a few years ago, it kind of really blew up over there as well. But you only had one sound, that was EDM. And right now, you're really seeing the sounds developing more and more. People are more aware of the music that's actually out there. So I think it's going to be more towards music with a lot of feel to it.
So more melody based, would you say?
I would say definitely more melody based. You know, personally myself, I'm a big fan of tracks from Till of Us and Plex. stuff like that. It's more underground, more feel to it, and for me personally, that would be a great development.
Yeah, you can also kind of feel it's almost trancey, almost a lot of that music.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like trance on lower BPM.
Yeah, and I noticed that when you were playing your set the other night, is it mixed in very seamlessly with a lot of your older music as well. I think a lot of the music right now is actually drawing a lot of inspiration from old school trance music.
I think so, definitely. If you, still see a lot of tracks with, also with deep house or other genres, even techno. It's like a track like Push, Universal Nation, kind of gets remixed into techno. Some trance tracks even got into a new deep house bracket as well. So it's something that keeps on reviving, definitely.
Back on when you started Doorn, would you say it's how long were you producing music before you started the actual label?
I think I started the label around 2007. So I was already producing music for about 10 years. Yeah, at least. And when I started the label, that was around the time where I really also started focusing on just one name. So, that being Sander van Doorn, I had a lot of aliases, and I really felt like it was becoming a little bit confusing for people, what is what and who's who. So I started focusing more on Sander van Doorn, started producing tracks like By Any Demand. Shortly after the riff came, also experimenting a little bit, tracks like Grasshopper, doing the remix for Pancake, Don't Turn Your Back on Me, which was a little bit more housey. And around that time, I started the label.
So what about people here who are considering starting their own label? What was the advantage, do you think, of starting your own label and having your own imprint?
Well, for me personally, the label was originally solely meant for me as a platform, to expand my own identity as an artist, the same as a radio show, for instance.
And of course, back then it was different. Yeah. We didn't have stuff like SoundCloud and self-releasing on Spotify.
No, definitely not. Just we were pressing vinyls and just selling them.
And now, with considering the fact that it's much easier to release stuff yourself, would you say it's still do you think it's been diluted, having your own label, or would you still say it's still quite an important thing?
I think it's still very important, especially as an extension for your own identity, and also to attract more other artists, starting artists, towards your own brand as well. I mean, it's something you can really do a lot with on the live side of things as well. For instance, I do a lot of Doorn Records parties where in this case, all the Italian DJs, they come and play as well on the lineup. And for them, it's great because, they have a stage to perform on. For me, it's great because I get a lot of inspiration from the guys as well. So I would say definitely it's just as important today.
Now, moving on to something about work and life in the studio and all that kind of stuff. I want to talk about it more deeply in a little bit, but let's just talk about what it's like being in the studio and then touring and then having to find time to be with your family, for example. What's your work-life balance like?
When I started becoming a DJ, besides of producing, because I literally I produced a lot of tracks under a lot of different aliases before I even thought about becoming a DJ professionally. I mean, I was already DJing in a local pub when I was a student myself, but that was more to pay the bills every month. And for me, it was great because I was in the studio producing music one after each other, one after another. Doing all these remixes, and for me that was the ideal moment. Then I got booked for the first time for a show over in Switzerland, and I instantly fell in love with being a DJ as well besides producing. But then a big problem originated because I was spending all this time in the studio, and now all of a sudden I had to go on tour as well. So for me it was all about finding the balance between the two of those. And that was even before I had like a relationship or a life besides being an artist. So that was already really tricky, and I really felt like listening to myself, how many days I needed in the studio, sometimes having a weekend off, and just trying to find a balance. And that's one of the most trickiest part of being an artist, finding that balance.
How heavily planned is your schedule? So I'm sure for a lot of people here, probably we're definitely not as busy as you are, so we can kind of wing it. But for once you got to a point, what was the point when you realized, man, I really need to plan out every single day?
Well, when the whole thing blew up with the EDM era, that for me was a big sign. It's like if I'm not the boss in this process myself, I find myself being on the road every single day, and then I'm just gonna be becoming crazy because I really need to be in the studio in order to for me feel like I have all these weapons ready to be released. So I really figured out that. My best production months are November, January, and May. So knowing that, for me, yeah.
Because it's cold? No
Yeah,
one goes out?
I don't know why. I would say November because it was the end of the summer season. So you got a lot of inspiration from playing out all these festivals. January in general is always a more quiet month. So you have all this time in the studio. And in May, you're getting psyched up for the summer season. So that's a really good period as well.
How many shows have you done in the last year?
In the last year, well, 2019, I'm not too sure actually. Quite a lot, yeah. A lot of shows in the US actually.
Do you when you're on the road, do you produce as well?
I do a little bit. I prefer to be in the studio where I have the right speakers, but for general small ideas, I always use the laptop as well.
Something that I think is very important today, especially with people starting out, is the fact that today, compared to when you started producing and DJing, we have all this social media now. We got Instagram, we got Facebook, even stuff like SoundCloud, for example, and you just end up comparing yourself to all these other people. What's your take on that? Because for a lot of people, there's a lot of self-doubt. Do you ever like look at Instagram and you go, oh, Martin's doing this today, and then I'm sitting at home doing nothing, or something like that? And what do you think is something that people here can take home and kind of just reassure themselves it's not always just about social media? Or
well, it's a tricky era these days because there's an overload of information. You have all these people doing great stuff. That's the only stuff you're gonna see on Instagram. It's all the great stuff that's happening. What you don't see, for instance, with an influencer or a lot of artists, is that they get up and they get really stressed because they want to post something interesting. So I kind of protected myself a little bit from that. I remember when MySpace came up. The record company came to me and was like, Sander, you need to have a MySpace profile. And I was like, no, why would I want to have a MySpace profile? Yeah, so everybody can find out every single day, what you're doing. I said, I don't want everybody to find out what I'm doing. So what is this? I said, I have a guest book on my website, so people can leave a comment. So that's my MySpace. Then it was like, no, that's not going to happen. So, MySpace came, in Holland Hives, Facebook. So I really, figured out how much I wanted to, present myself on social media, how much I want to read back on social media. I'm always interested in seeing what other people do, but the main focus is what I want to do myself.
So when it comes to stuff like social media and just seeing what other people are doing, it can be a source of motivation. You can get very motivated from watching someone else do something really big, and you're like, I want to do that as well. But one thing that can also cause is burnout, because people, you want to just keep working. It's like, I'm not going to achieve this, and I keep going. Have you ever experienced burnout, and what have you done to mitigate stuff like that?
Well, yeah, when, with the whole EDM era came, that was around the same era. Social media came up, so you had all these new things you had to take in consideration. For me, the biggest struggle was having my schedule planned without really feeling you had control over it yourself, because the record company or the bookings agent would plan all these gigs before you knew it. So you were back having a meeting, and you were like, when am I supposed to produce in the studio? Yeah, I know, it's important, but these gigs are very important as well. So I kind of felt like I was losing, the focus and how to control, my own schedule. And yeah, that nearly gave me a burnout.
So everyone here is obviously a production nerd. What DAW do you use?
Logic Pro X, yeah.
And a couple of yays out there, Ableton.
But you know, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what DAW you used. Some people produce great music on Cubase. Ableton these days is also a great platform. It's just what you're used to. Every single DAW has its own way of producing tracks. And for instance, for mixes, I use Ableton a lot.
Yeah, I actually remember when ages ago when Avicii just started, and it came out that he was using FL Studio, and people were like, "What the hell? You can make professional sounding music on this."
It doesn't matter, you know. You have a platform where you can put your music in, and it doesn't really matter what it is.
So, what about in terms of your sound? What kind of plugins define your sound? What are the tools that you use?
I still use my Faris TI2 a lot. And besides that, I love the massive synth, also the newest version. C-Length is great for making quick sounds. And besides that, I'm still using a lot of analog tube compressors just to get my sound like more organic. And also I have the distortion, the Culture Vulture. The stereo tube distortion I still use a lot, and I always love to keep a little bit of analog sound in my studio.
So another something I'm always interested in is what is your thought on stuff like samples? Because and using sample packs, for example, because some people are always like, oh, you can't use samples, you make your own music. But funny thing is, I remember when Animals came out, and then the kick is from.
You know that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He kind of borrowed my kick from Joy Energizer. Yeah. So he came to me. Actually, Jorn from Spinning Records came to me, and he's like, Martin has something to tell you. So he came to me and he's like, well, you know my new track Animals? Like, yeah. Nice kick, man. So he's yeah.
And that was the last time you put a clean kick on the first beat.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You know, if you put a clean kick, that's what's gonna happen. So, but it's fine, you know. It wasn't the thing that defined Animals. So I said to him, buy me a beer, and it's okay.
Wow, that's a very cheap way to clear a sample.
Yeah.
So what about like when you start a track? How do you start a track in the studio?
Kind of depends. Sometimes I just feel like starting with a rhythm. I always take a lot of time finding the perfect kick. Started doing some percussion on top of that and adding a bass line. It kind of, depends on whether I'm doing a Son of a Doorn track or Purple Haze track. Sometimes I don't even know. And I start with a melody or with just a drum and to see where it goes. But it's every single time is a little bit different. Yeah.
Do you ever get stuff like writer's block? Like you're in the studio and just nothing's coming out. Is there anything that you've done to help with that?
Well, I've learned that whenever it doesn't work in the studio, there's no point in staying in the studio. So whenever I feel like it's not going to work out, I just go out, do something fun, just buy some clothes or mow the lawn. I don't care. Just wash the car. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and there's no point at all being in the studio. But in general, just listening to a lot of music out there. Every week you have all these new promos. You play out as a DJ, you hear other DJs play, you check out new sounds on Spotify. You always get inspired, in the end.
Awesome. Well, we've been going for a bit over half an hour now. Let's open it up to the floor for some questions. And anyone got any questions here?
Hi, I'm Damian. I love your music, and thanks. I remember listening first to your track "Love Is Darkness" when I was maybe 9 years younger. Okay, I'll go to a question, but I love your tracks.
Thanks.
Okay. So my question is, how important to you is to know to play an instrument in order to produce music?
I would say, playing an instrument is a big help for you as an artist. I never learned how to play an instrument myself. I had to go and play the flute when I was 6 years old because my mom felt like I had to do an instrument.
Is that why you signed flute?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so I didn't like that at all. So I stopped doing that after a week, and I don't think it's so much about learning how to play an instrument. It's more about what you want to create with it. And these days, on a computer, on a keyboard, but also only with using a matrix scheme on like a DAW, doing the notes on a matrix scheme is enough to create a melody. So I don't think it's super important to learn an instrument. Just know how to express yourself, with your DAW.
My Logic.
Ah, there you go. Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's a good DAW to use, definitely. Yeah.
My name is Clem de la Creme,
Hi.
and I wanted to know your thoughts on having different aliases. Because you had several different ones, and I've been doing everything under one alias, but they might be different sounds. So
Yeah, for me, I'm using different aliases was because I didn't want to stick with just one sound in the studio, but I didn't want to confuse people at the same time. So that's why I used different aliases. So Sam Sharp was more techie trancey, Sandler was more euphoric, Purple Haze was very deep and low BPM driven, and Sander van Doorn was more housey or techie. For me, that was just a way to experiment a lot in the studio and try to figure out myself as an artist what I really wanted to produce myself, which was a lot of genres.
So it's detrimental if you use just one alias, maybe?
Well, you could if you're really focused on just one genre. There's no point in using different aliases. But if you're really focused on creating a more wider platform, then using different aliases could definitely work.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey, so my question is about work ethic and how do you go about not the fear of making something like new, unique that people will be interested in, and not just repeating yourself after all these years. Because I feel like this is a real struggle when you get to at some point, you like what you're doing, but you don't want to just do that all the time. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I kind of learned myself from the start that whenever I produce a new track, I always start from with a blank screen. So I use a different kick, I use a different structure. For instance, the problem with a lot of EDM tracks at one point was the basic structure everybody was sticking to, 50 minutes, kick, build up, break, drop, build off, and that was it. So that kind of, lost its touch quite quickly. Everybody decided on using the F note because, it had, you could hear the bass line and you could feel it really low. That worked perfectly in combination with as like a kick tail. You can't keep on doing that. You need to challenge yourself in the studio. For instance, started producing music under the C note, and using a different structure. So I've always learned myself to do something different with every track I produce, and especially when producing an artist album, you have like a lot of creative freedom to try out all these different kind of sounds, and I would say that keeps you fresh in the studio.
Hey, you just dropped a Hardstyle track with Frontliner, which is great. I already bought it. And I'm a Hardstyle DJ and producer. And I wanted to know if you think it's more difficult to get into the Hardstyle scene if you're not from the Netherlands. I mean, you're Dutch, but I feel like all the Hardstyle DJs are from the Netherlands, and I don't know how to get it in.
Yeah, hardstyle is obviously not my main genre I'm doing, but I became friends with Barry Frontliner a couple of years ago, and to be honest, I really was open to go to DEF CON a few years ago. My wife actually, there you go, DEF CON 1, yes. So yeah. My wife took me to DEF CON, and I was like, okay, so what am I supposed to expect? It's like really live music. And then I listened to the tracks that were played, and I was like, well, actually, the melodies are very intelligent. They're very profound, and there's a lot of passion into this music. So I started to know people like noise controllers and frontliners, and I was like, well, why not just produce a track, together with one of those guys? And I did a back-to-back with Frontliner at Mysteryland last year. I did the DEF CON stage a couple of years ago together with noise controllers, and it's a very energetic crowd. They're very very picky with their music. And if a hardstyle DJ becomes an EDM DJ, people are like completely going crazy. It's like, what are you doing? And it's a lot of passion when it comes to it. But it kind of started in Holland, but there's a lot of French-core DJs who are doing really well, as well as the Italian DJs. I think Techno Boy is Italian, so it's not just focused on Holland, definitely not.
Okay.
Australia is also very big.
Oh, Australia is really big. South America is becoming more bigger as well. So no, you don't necessarily have to be from the Netherlands for that.
Okay.
Cool.
Hi, Sander. I'm Alex. Nice to meet you. My question is around DJing. How do you approach your DJ sets, and how do you prepare for playing to such huge crowds? Kind of interested in how you can kind of build that connection.
Yeah.
On such a big level.
Well, there's a big difference between doing a club show or doing a big festival. I would say for a club show, you're a lot more flexible to try different stuff. So I use Rekordbox, and I throw in a lot of new tracks into the Rekordbox, my own, and also promos from Doorn Records or other labels. And I kind of always figure out for myself what to play the first 50 minutes, so I get into the flow of things. But after that, it's just solely reading the crowds in the club. When it comes to a festival, it's very important to know who's playing before you and after you. And so it's a little bit more fixed, but still, as DJ, I think you must be able to play in front of a crowd. So you need to be flexible with that as well. But I usually end up throwing a lot of tracks in the playlist and see what happens.
Howdy. Hi. Right. My name's Nick. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
My question is, how important is what should I call this, musical fingerprint to you in the context of when somebody listens to your track, they know, oh, I know that's Purple Haze. I love Purple Haze. And then if they switch to something else, one of your tracks from Son of Unknown, I'm sorry, I don't know your tracks very well.
Yeah, Son of Unknown, for instance.
And then they're like, oh, I know that's him. How important is that to you? Because I think to some extent it's engaging for the crowd. For example, we have DJ/producers like San Holo with his signatures swirls and his that people just think like, I expected that from him.
Yeah.
How important is that to you as a producer itself?
Well, it's very important, but it's not something that actually happens, because you're focused on that. It's whether I'm producing a Purple Haze track or a Son of Unknown track. In the end, it's the way I produce the track. You can always hear, a fan will always hear it's a track of mine. But some tracks are a little bit more moody, other tracks are more techy. But in the end, there's a general sounding flow that's my own identity, and that's not something I really focus on when I produce a track. It's not something I want to happen, but it kind of happens because of your style as a producer.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that. Thank you very much.
All right, well, that brings us to the end. And thank you so much again for coming out here to London, to Point Blank Music School. Really appreciate your time. And I hope everyone here and people at home learned a lot from what you've told us. So let's give Sander van Doorn a round of applause.
Thank you.